So here we are with one of my favorite topics in public admin, and that is decision making. And we're going to start with one of those situations that you never really want to face, but it's bound to happen. So this one is that 2 a.m. phone call, multiple phone calls. You're the emergency management director. You have a big fire at a downtown apartment building, a huge accident on the interstate. You have flash flooding in some neighborhoods, and you got a power outage affecting the pumping situation. And you only have a limited number of crews on duty. So how do you decide who goes where? What info do you need? How quickly do you have to decide things? And who's responsible if things go wrong? And so understanding how public administrators make decisions under pressure, uncertainty, and competing demands is where we are today. So why decision making matters in public administration? The stakes are higher in public service than they are in the private sector, right? You have to deal with a number of different things that have a lot of effects on individual rights and freedoms, community safety, public trust, resource allocation, and you have to comply with legal things, and you're accountable to the public for all of the actions that you do. And so sometimes you have procurement decisions, you have service deployment decisions, you have permit trade-offs, you have to determine benefits eligibility, and you have to weigh those multiple bottom lines, not just a single one, not just efficiency, when you're trying to serve the public interest and make a good decision. A real challenge is making good decisions when you have bad information. And sometimes, in a public health environment situation, you have, conflicting lab results, you have media speculation, social media rumors, political pressure, and legal constraints. And so how do you make sound decisions amid all of this cacophony of information that's not always the best? That's a real challenge, right? And so what do? You have to kind of find better information, cut through all that noise, verify your sources, have good information and systems in place, have reliable stakeholders that can give you solid information about what you're going to have to decide. So we're going to cover 4 different models plus a couple of decision making, different ways to make choices. And so there's 4 of them here that we're going to step through one by one, and then we'll talk about a couple kind of alternative approaches. And so the first one here is the textbook approach, rational decision making. And so the steps here, this is a very rational, ordered way to make a decision, define the problem, identify all the alternatives and all possible solutions, evaluate each one, select the best one, implement it, and then just see if it works, monitor and evaluate. And then, everything good should roll down because you've done so well to completely rationally think through the process. It's sometimes not totally realistic, but we can think of an example of redesigning a city's emergency alert system based on research, community input, pilot testing, evaluation, seeing if it works, right? It is a good way to go through the steps and process. The strengths, though, it does have that thorough analysis. It's evidence-based, it's clear documentation. But the reality, though, are the limitations on the rational decision-making approach. We are bound by time. We have to make emergency decisions very quick. We don't wait for, analysis. And, we don't have unlimited time to wait for something even not an emergency. Perfect information is rare. We have limits on how comprehensive the analysis can be. Stakeholders want quick action. And defining what is the best, most optimal decision is very subjective in a real way. And so the reality is we use another approach called bounded rationality. This was developed by Herbert Simon, and he coined the term satisficing. What is satisfactory and sufficient? That is the type of definition of decision-making that Simon offers here with bounded rationality. We have limited time, limited information, and limited cognitive capacity. And so we find solutions to problems that are just good enough. We use experience, we use our professional judgment, and we accept the first acceptable solution rather than just continuing on to trying to weigh every single possible alternative in the universe. This is mostly how a lot of decisions are made. It kind of it tracks with the rationality model, but it recognizes that there are limitations to what we can actually do with the time, resources, and information that we have. So you can see a kind of an example here of a rational approach versus a bounded rational approach in terms of response to flood or snow or whatever it may be. You know, you kind of adopt this bounded rational approach to actually get the job done right away. Another approach kind of builds on this rationality approach, and it's called incremental decision making. And this is developed or kind of articulated first by Charles Lindblom in an article he titled "Muddling Through." And so you're kind of making small adjustments to existing policies. You test changes on a limited scale. You build consensus, and because most decision makers are risk adverse, by making just a little small change, you're reducing the risk and avoiding dramatic policy shifts. It works when you're dealing with politically sensitive issues that require consensus, in situations where radical change is pretty risky. The benefits of an incremental approach is it's politically feasible. You can get political consensus around just a small change. You can test and adjust based on experiences, and it's kind of a lower cost approach to making a decision or implementing change than a full wholesale different policy or different approach to something than you've done in the past. It is slow, right? You may not be able to address urgent problems. There's no moonshot in 1969 if we were kind of incremental with everything, right? That took a big change. That took a huge amount of progress to achieve that within a decade. So, there are kind of benefits. Most political changes that we have, most changes coming out of Washington, for instance, are going to be this kind of incremental change, a small little gradual improvement here, a little bit more money there, a little bit less money there. This is kind of how it works. Another approach is the garbage can model. And this is kind of an idea about when organizations are in chaos. Most organizations can, be considered in some level of chaos. And articulated by Cohen, March, and Olson, you have the idea that there are problems out there, independent of solutions, but those problems seek solutions, and the solutions themselves look for problems to solve. So people have already come up with solutions to problems that don't exist. When a problem happens, they say, oh, this solution may work, right? And so you have people kind of moving out in and out of the decision space, having their own preferred solutions, and there are opportunities that arise to say, let's attach this solution to this particular problem and see what it works. This happens in crisis situations where you have a bunch of different issues. So somebody's just to say, let's try this because I think it'll work. You have it when organizations are under pressure. You have it when situations of high turnover and unclear authority. And you have it in terms of media attention. So garbage can and crisis situations, major public safety crisis, right? You have multiple problems: immediate public safety threat, media and political pressure, resource coordination challenges, legal and procedural requirements. So you have multiple solutions. Deploy everything, call for aid, implement emergency protocols, hold a press conference. And multiple participants, different directors of different agencies, elected officials, emergency management unions, public safety unions, school superintendents, hospital partners. And so what you actually do, whatever the approach actually is just dependent on who's actually in the room right there at that time and what their kind of preferred approach is, what they actually want to do. They're just going to stick it to the problem. Okay, moving away from those kind of four kind of connected ideas is another one called public choice theory. And this is kind of applying an economic logic to government decisions. And the kind of fundamental component of this is that people and public employees are self-interested rational actors. Agencies seek to maximize their budgets and their influence. Politicians seek to maximize votes and power. And citizens seek to maximize benefits while minimizing costs. And so, applying this logic to what governments are going to do, you have a permitting agency that's seeking broader authority and predictable funding, inspectors general pursuing high visibility investigations, public works building large capital projects and expanding programs. But all of this is the self-interest kind of crux of it all, right? We seek to maximize our self-interest as a rational, human being. Agencies seek to maximize their self-interest. So you're applying this kind of market logic in a sense, because in the marketplace, right, you seek to maximize your self-interest, right? When you are going to buy a new car, you go to that car lot and you're not going to, the guy says, well, that's going to be $60,000. You're not going to say, okay, well, here, I'll give you 61,000. And you're not going to say, okay, here's 60,000. You're going to go back and forth a good bit, right? And try to get the lower deal. You're going to try to maximize yourself. Your self-interest is spending the least amount of money possible for this new car that you want, right? It's the same idea here, right? This explains why agencies resist budget cuts. It predicts resistance to efficiency improvements, shows why coordination can be difficult, and it reveals why kind of incentives can be misaligned in a bureaucratic structure. All right, so where it doesn't perfectly fit, some public employees, this is what I talked about earlier in a previous lecture, that we do have this public service motivation. So our self-interest, in a sense, sometimes is tamped down, right? And so there is this kind of mission-driven that is layered on top of your rational self-interest. That's why some people are just kind of destined to be in public service, right? They're able to temper that innate self-interest. It does kind of ignore professional norms, misses collaborative success stories where agencies do work together, even though it's not maximizing their own agency self-interest. At the end, kind of recognizing that this self-interest is important, but also promote the public service values. All right, so another one here is participative decision-making. And this is when you are involving stakeholders in decision-making. This is collaborative governance, the stuff that I teach to graduate students, the stuff that you may learn in a metropolitan government class. This is where you're involving people, these stakeholders, right? Your project in this class has to kind of identify the stakeholders and who's involved, who has a say, who has a stake in the situation, right? And why you're doing this is because they have good information. And right, to make good decisions, you need solid information. More ideas are leading to better solutions. Stakeholder involvement builds support and increases legitimacy. And there's this kind of democratic ethos underlying all of it as well. And so in a number of the different areas that you're working on for your papers, right, here's where this stakeholder, this participative decision-making is beneficial and can also be a challenge. So more voices can certainly help with better decisions, perspectives. The support is absolutely great. The legitimacy and the learning opportunity is wonderful. When you do this, though, it is time consuming, right? It is harder to make decisions by consensus, by consultation, than just saying we're going to do this unilaterally. Groups have different interests, right? If you go back to the kind of rational self-interested idea, each one of these groups is seeking to maximize their own self-interest. And so some of the times those conflicts can be difficult to overcome. Citizens may lack expertise for the complex decisions that we face in the public sector. So they're kind of coming at it from their own limited bit of information. You as the decision maker have to kind of pool information together, but it's difficult sometimes in a situation to convince other people, those other stakeholders, of your information. That's certainly a skill. Risk management and public decisions. This is why a lot of things are incremental, right? We're trying to maximize the risk or actually just deal with the kind of uncertainty and consequences of the public administration activities that we do. Sometimes this is service delivery risks, legal risk, political, financial, operational. And so you have to have particular tools to help you understand how to manage these types of risks. There are a number of different strategies. One is not doing anything. But that often doesn't actually work out because, in the public sector, we're required to do things. We have to get there and serve the public. But you can mitigate, you can transfer, or you can just accept. The real thing is kind of balancing the risk adverse nature with accomplishing the mission of the organization. So facts, values, when you are making decision, when you are gathering information, fact, what is the situation? What are the options? What are the outcomes? Values are, what do we prioritize? What's the most important? What's right? Reality is you're having to deal with both of these, right? And sometimes in the world that we live in, you're having to value some facts over other facts, it seems, and in this kind of culture of information that we have. Expertise and democratic accountability, these can often be in conflict. You see this in a lot of the early on deference of the Congress to the public agencies around technical issues. And so the Congress said, we're going to create the law and it's going to be really broad. And then you agencies have the ability to figure out how to enforce it, set the standards, etc. And that lasted for a long time until recently that, one of the foundational Supreme Court rulings, the Chevron doctrine, was kind of overturned. And so Congress pulled back some of that kind of democratic accountability approach to it. But really here you have the agencies with their training, with their technical know-how, and you have elected officials that are kind of the political masters of the agencies giving their democratic preferences. And so there's a real balance and a challenge when it comes to that. You can stop here and read a case study, on kind of a transit fare restructure and multiple decision-making models and actions, things that come from rational, bound to rational, incremental, and participative. It's a worthwhile one to look through. Like many things, technology continues to change how we are making decisions. I said Herbert Simon came up with the bounded rationality model. Herbert Simon was a political scientist and in his later career turned to computer science. And he's one of the kind of forefathers of predictive analysis and artificial intelligence. And his whole idea was, how do we use technology to make better decisions, right? How do we overcome our human cognitive limitations to be able to process more information more quickly to come up with better decisions? And so that's exactly what technology does these days. There are some challenges as well as benefits. A lot of challenges are the bias written into the code. Humans are writing codes and algorithms and training models of how to do analysis. And so what bias do we put into these kind of artificial intelligence analytical units? And that certainly leads into the ethical considerations in decision making. And we have some kind of ethical dilemmas: the individual versus the community, efficiency over equity, and some frameworks, right? Utilitarian framework, rights-based framework, justice-based, care-based, deontological duty-based. Decision-making in crisis, sometimes there are pressure, high stakes, information gaps. This is where we started out the actual conversation here, that 2 a.m. phone call. And so how you actually deal with that is trying to just kind of streamline the process, have some kind of plan in place that you can really turn to that's based on data, but then also really be flexible as the situation is unfolding on the ground. So future trends, public decision making. We already talked about technological. Citizens are going to continue to want to be able to engage in what government is doing and how it's making its decisions and ensuring those decisions are transparent and the agencies are accountable. And they have more and more ways to actually do that. The culture of evidence-based practice in decisions is certainly present in public administration these days. So there are certain skills for decision making: the analytical skills, right? The political skills, ethical skills, and leadership skills that all go into decision making. You can stop here for these questions to think about, and then stop here for the summary of the module. All right, that's it for decision making. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We'll see you in the next one.